He's deformed in body and mind, a master of deception, determined to be king by any means necessary. Get ready to meet one of Shakespeare's most chilling villains, Richard III.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really embarking on quite an in-depth exploration of William Shakespeare's Richard III. And it's more than just a history play, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. It's this gripping, really darkly theatrical journey. Goes right into the heart of tyranny.
Right. And it's famous, of course, for giving us one of literature's most iconic and, frankly, utterly Machiavellian protagonists.
Absolutely. And this deep dive, well, it's really tailor-made for you, whether you're just a curious lifelong learner, maybe a seasoned theater enthusiast, or, simply someone fascinated by these timeless human stories and the profound psychological depths of ambition.
Yeah. We're going to try and really unpack how Richard's malevolence twists his ambition, how it leads him down this path of destruction, not just for himself, but, for an entire nation.
It's a story that just keeps resonating, even centuries later.
It really does. So we'll meticulously trace the core plot, highlighting those major turning points that mark Richard's ruthless climb to power, and then inevitably his downfall.
And from there?
Well, from there, we'll peel back the layers of Richard's really complex character. We'll look at the key relationships he manipulates and ultimately destroys.
Okay.
Then we'll dive into the really profound themes that make this play so enduringly powerful. Ambition, deception, and the chilling consequences of unchecked power.
And we can't skip the famous lines, right? Some of those moments just stay with you.
Oh, absolutely not. We couldn't do a deep dive without highlighting some of those truly memorable lines and pivotal scenes. They've echoed through history, really become part of our cultural language.
Yeah.
And finally, we'll tackle that fascinating question of myth versus historical reality when it comes to the real King Richard III.
Always a big one with this play.
Always. And importantly, what lessons this play might still offer us about human nature, about power, even today.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. Let's get into it.
So our journey starts in England, right after the tumultuous Wars of the Roses.
Right. The White Rose versus the Red Rose, York versus Lancaster.
Exactly. For decades, this brutal civil conflict raged. But now, on the surface at least, the fighting seems to have concluded. King Edward IV, a Yorkist, he's on the throne.
So a new era. Peace and joy, maybe.
That's the appearance. A fragile, seemingly new era of peace. But for Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who's Edward's younger brother, well, this peace is anything but glorious for him.
Yeah, okay. And that's where Shakespeare drops us in.
Precisely. The play opens with Richard himself, alone on stage, delivering one of the most famous soliloquies in, well, all of literature.
Now is the winter of our discontent.
Made glorious summer by this son of York.
Exactly. He's talking about his brother Edward's reign bringing peace, but it's immediately clear this summer means nothing to Richard personally. He lays bare his soul right there, to us, the audience.
It's like he's inviting us in, isn't it? Into his confidence. Yes, his twisted confidence. He describes himself as cheated of feature, deformed, even unfinished. It's an immediate, quote, jarring confession.
And it's such a powerful opening. He feels so, physically disadvantaged, ill-suited for this piping time of peace, that he sees only one path.
Right, and he proclaims his chilling intention to prove a villain.
That's not just an offhand remark.
No, it's a deliberate, calculated declaration. It sets the entire stage for his deep-seated desire for power. And he frames his perceived physical difference, his deformity, as a justification for this profound internal malice.
As if his outward form dictates his wicked choices.
Right. Yeah. Or at least that's how he presents it. What's truly fascinating and frankly quite unsettling about this opening is the dramatic irony.
How so?
Well, he directly proclaims his villainy to us, the audience. He almost invites us to be co-conspirators in his plotting, to watch his dark artistry unfold.
But then he turns around.
Exactly. The very next moment, to other characters in the play, he presents a completely different face. Charming, almost sympathetic, often appearing very pious.
So this duplicity, it's just core to him.
It's so complex, so ingrained. His true villainy can't simply be linked to his physical form. It really stems from his actions, his choices, and this deep-seated internal corruption, a conscious choice to be evil.
And he doesn't waste any time putting that villainy into action, does he?
No, not at all. His machinations begin immediately, targeting those closest to him. One of his very first victims is his own brother, George, Duke of Clarence.
Ah, Clarence, there's that prophecy, right? Something about G.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
This intriguing prophecy floating around that G of Edward's heirs the murderer shall be. And Richard, well, he's cunning. He seizes on this, twists it, cleverly implicating Clarence.
Making him seem like the threat to the king.
Precisely. We see him in action when Clarence is being taken to the Tower of London, under arrest, thanks to Richard's subtle whispers in King Edward's ear, of course.
And Richard pretends to be concerned.
Oh, absolutely. He feigns the most heartfelt sympathy. Promises Clarence, I will deliver you, or else lie for you. Sounds like brotherly love, doesn't it?
It does, on the surface.
But as soon as Clarence is out of earshot, Richard turns right back to us, the audience, his confidants, and reveals his true, sinister intent. The exact opposite of what he just promised. He actually laughs about his deception.
Chilling. Just how quickly he can pivot.
Really is. Feigned loyalty to open malevolence in a heartbeat.
And the murder itself is so specific, so memorable in the play. Drowned in wine.
Yes, drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine. The play explicitly dates this to 1478. And beyond this, Shakespeare uses accusations, hints of Richard's involvement in earlier deaths to build his villainous reputation right from the start.
Like Henry VI and Lady Anne's husband.
Exactly. He's implicated in the deaths as Henry VI, the former Lancastrian king, and Lady Anne's first husband, Edward of Westminster, who was Henry VI's son. Now, historically,
Right, I was going to ask about that.
Historically, these particular claims are heavily disputed. But in the world of the play, they immediately paint Richard as a monster in the making.
So the stage is well and truly set for his ruthless ascent.
Meticulously set. King Edward V's health is steadily weakening throughout these early acts. And when he dies in April 1483, Richard swiftly assumes power as Lord Protector.
Which is a critical moment. Gives him control over the young heirs.
Crucial. Direct control over the young, uncrowned king, Edward V, and his younger brother.
And he doesn't miss a beat, does he? Straight into seizing the crown for himself.
Immediately. Launches into this calculated, absolutely brazen campaign. He's assisted by his cousin, the Duke of Buckingham, who's just as ambitious.
All right, Buckingham, what's their first move?
They start spreading these insidious rumors that King Edward V's two young sons, including the uncrowned Edward V, are illegitimate.
Wow, disinheriting them just like that.
Effectively, yes. It's a bold, almost unthinkable move. Undermining the rightful succession, casting doubt on the legitimacy of the throne itself.
And then comes the tower.
Then, with this veneer of concern for their safety, he coaxes the young princes into what he calls an extended stay at the Tower of London.
But from the moment they enter,
They disappear,
you.
permanently from public view. Now, the historical circumstances, the actual circumstances of their disappearance and presumed deaths are famously undetermined. We still don't have definitive proof.
But the play leaves little doubt.
Oh, none. Popular belief, both at the time and for centuries since, strongly holds Richard murdered them. Their deaths become this undeniable anchor for his infamy. It violates what the play presents as these temporal narratives of a future secured by the triumph of innocent youth. Meaning their deaths don't just end their lives, they metaphorically crush England's hope for a stable, innocent future. Richard isn't just killing heirs, he's killing the very idea of peaceful, legitimate succession.
And he's not just eliminating rivals in the line of succession, he's taking out anyone who stands in his way, even former allies, like Lord Hastings.
Hastings, yes. A staunch loyalist to the late Edward I. Hastings flatly refuses to support Richard's bid for the throne.
And the price for that loyalty.
Swift, summary execution on completely trumped-up charges of treason. Richard even brazenly accuses Hastings' mistress of witchcraft to justify it.
Just arbitrary justice. Brutal.
Swift, brutal, no due process whatsoever.
So after systematically removing obstacle after obstacle,
Eliminating anyone who stood in his way, yes. Richard and Buckingham then orchestrate this grand show. Richard's apparent piety, his reluctance to take the crown.
the whole performance.
It's an elaborate charade. Richard appearing deeply religious, humble, and it works. Parliament declares him the rightful heir.
And he's crowned July 1483.
Coronation as Richard III on July 6, 1483. The pinnacle of his vaulting ambition achieved through a mountain of lies and bloodshed.
But the reign itself is pretty short and violent.
Brief, yes, and absolutely violent, characterized by further murders and a complete disregard for humanity. Richard, now king, even decides he needs to dispose of Lady Anne, his wife.
Why her? She's already queen.
He doesn't need her anymore. In fact, she's an obstacle to his next plan, to woo his niece, Elizabeth of York, Edward V's next remaining heir.
To solidify his claim even further.
Exactly. Solidify his claim, perhaps silence any future challenges through that marriage.
But the play says he poisons Anne. Is that historically accurate?
Well, that's another key point of divergence. The play graphically depicts Anne's death by poisoning for this calculated purpose. But historical consensus indicates she likely died of tuberculosis.
Oh, okay.
And their marriage, it was a long-standing one. Possibly even happy, historically speaking, certainly not the swift, loveless manipulation Shakespeare portrays to heighten the drama and the villainy.
It serves the Tudor narrative again, making Richard seem even worse.
Precisely. It's one of many instances where Shakespeare takes significant historical liberties for dramatic and arguably political effect.
So as his reign progresses, Richard becomes more isolated, paranoid.
Increasingly so. His popularity, which was never exactly robust given how he got the throne, dwindles even further. He's eliminated so many people. But in doing so, he's sown seeds of fear and deep distrust. He's left himself utterly alone at the top.
And that isolation leads to his downfall.
It's a key factor, absolutely. Buckingham, his former key accomplice, the man who helped him rise, suddenly turns against him.
Why? What was the trigger?
Richard denies him a promised land grant, a crucial betrayal. This act of disloyalty, denying his closest ally what was promised, pushes Buckingham to defect.
And where does Buckingham go?
He defects to Henry Tudor, the Earl of Richmond. He's in exile in France at this point, representing the last real hope of the Lancastrian line.
So the tide starts to turn.
The inevitable begins. Rebellions start to brew across England, challenging Richard's increasingly fragile grip on power.
And it all leads to Bosworth Field.
The final climactic battle at Bosworth Field. And the night before this decisive confrontation, that's when the ghosts appear.
Ah, yes, the ghosts of his victims.
Prince Edward, Henry VI, Clarence, Hastings, Buckingham. Each one appearing to him, reminding him of his horrific deeds, telling him to despair and die.
And wishing Richmond victory.
Chilling.
It's a powerful, truly unsettling moment of psychological torment.
And how does Richard react?
He wakes screaming for Jesus, suddenly realizing the profound horror of his situation. He says he's all alone, recognizes he cannot even pity himself.
That scene is pivotal, isn't it? It strips away the mask.
Completely. Strips away his confident, villainous facade, reveals the profound torment of his conscience. For the first time, he sees himself as the monster he has created.
And the battle itself.
It culminates, as history tells us, in Richard's defeat and death. He famously dies crying out, a horse, my kingdom for a horse,"
That desperate plea.
in his final moments. Richmond emerges victorious, takes the crown as Henry VII. His subsequent marriage to Elizabeth of York, Edward V's daughter, a Yorkist princess, officially ends the Wars of the Roses.
Inaugurating the Tudor dynasty. Exactly. Bringing us full circle, in a way, to that initial glorious summer of peace, but one forged through immense bloodshed and the brutal triumph of a new order.
Okay, let's dive deeper into Richard himself. The play is almost obsessive about his physical form, isn't it?
It really is. He constantly describes himself in these damning terms. Cheated a feature, deformed, unfinished. And other characters, well, they throw insults like bottled spider, foul bunchback toad.
But you mentioned earlier the play is kind of ambiguous about the exact extent of it.
That's a crucial distinction. It focuses more on the perception and the interpretation of his body, rather than giving us, say, precise medical details.
And how does Shakespeare play with that?
Masterfully. Now, we know from the skeleton discovered in 2012 that the real Richard III did have scoliosis, a curved spine. But Shakespeare's dramatic focus isn't just on that physical reality. It's about how Richard's body is perceived, and more importantly, how he uses that perception.
Right, the Renaissance belief linking outward form and inner morality.
Exactly. People often thought a deformed body signified a corrupted soul. Richard weaponizes this very idea.
So he leans into it. Since you see me as a monster, I'll be one.
Pretty much. He exploits people's assumptions about his body. It's almost as if he's saying, okay, if this is how I'm seen, then I'll play the part. He's not just a natural monster, born deformed. Through his calculated actions, his choices, he actively creates an artificial monster.
So the true villainy isn't the body, it's the actions.
It stems from his internal corruption, his deliberate choices. His duplicity is so complex, you just can't pin it simply on his appearance.
And psychologically, where does this villainy come from? It's not just the body, as you say.
No, it develops from a profound sense of, well, lack of loyalty in his family, as the play presents it. He sees his own brothers as rivals, and there's this chilling refusal of all forms of affection.
That line, love forswore me and my mother's room.
Haunting, isn't it? It offers this key, albeit maybe self-serving, insight into his psyche. He presents himself as someone denied love from birth, therefore justified in rejecting it, embracing cruelty instead. He uses this perceived deprivation as a kind of springboard for his ambition.
And you mentioned he shifts between this perceived natural monstrosity and acting as an artificial one.
Yes. Early in the play, he's remarkably direct with us, the audience, in those soliloquies, making us feel like co-conspirators.
Sharing his wicked plans.
Exactly. But as his power grows and his paranoia and isolation set in, his monologues become less about sharing the plot and more internal, reflecting his increasing self-absorption, his fragmented psyche.
The mask starts to crack.
You could say that, revealing the torment underneath. His impish to fiendish humor is also critical, especially early on.
Like the Vice character from older plays.
Precisely like the Vice from medieval morality plays. A mischievous, evil trickster who makes villainy seem charming, even amusing. He draws the audience into his wicked schemes. He's self-aware, too, calling himself the formal vice, iniquity. He knows he's performing evil.
And this manipulation pitting Clarence against Edward, wooing Anne, using Buckingham, it drives everything.
It's the engine of his rise and fall. He finds this perverse delight in his own cunning, his ability to control others.
Okay, speaking of manipulation, let's look at the key players caught in his web. Starting with Lady Anne. That scene is audacious.
Audacious to the point of being almost unbelievable. He woos her against all reason, all decency, over the very corpse of her father-in-law, Henry VI.
Whom Richard murdered.
And whose son, her first husband, Richard, also killed.
How does he even begin to pull that off?
It's one of the most astonishing scenes in Shakespeare, truly demonstrating the sheer, terrifying power of his rhetoric. Anne curses him, reviles him, calls him a devil, yet she succumbs. She marries him shortly after.
And her conflict isn't about his looks, is it?
No, it's centered entirely on his murderous actions. This scene highlights how his cunning words, his twisted logic, can overcome even the most direct evidence of his depravity. He convinces her, somehow, that his love justifies his crimes, or at least that she has no other choice. It shows how easily truth can be bent.
Then there's Buckingham, Richard's right-hand man for a while.
His indispensable accomplice in the ascent. Buckingham helps spread those rumors about the prince's illegitimacy. He acts as Richard's mouthpiece, convincing Londoners of Richard's piety, his reluctance to take the crown. Basically manages Richard's PR.
But Buckingham seems to trust Richard.
He seems to operate under this misguided belief that Richard would not lie to an accomplice. A deeply misplaced trust.
And that's his undoing.
Ultimately, yes. When Richard, now king, denies him that promised land grant, it's a major betrayal. And even more chillingly, when Buckingham hesitates or questions Richard's intentions about the princes. Richard turns cold, cuts him off completely.
Showing he respects no bond, not even loyalty to his closest ally.
None whatsoever. That pushes Buckingham to turn against him.
And Lord Hastings, another obstacle.
Hastings represents that unwavering loyalty to the old king, Edward IV. He flatly refuses to back Richard's claim to the throne.
And pays the ultimate price.
A swift, summary execution on those trumped-up charges. Richard doesn't bother with evidence. Fabricates the witchcraft accusation against Hastings' mistress, June Shore, and uses it as justification for immediate beheading.
Brutal. A stark warning.
A brutal, arbitrary exercise of power, a clear warning. Defy me, and this is your fate. Hastings' death is often linked back to Queen Margaret's curses and Stanley's warning dream, hinting at fate maybe being at work too.
And the princes in the tower, their portrayal is just heartbreaking.
So tender, so innocent. Designed to evoke maximum sympathy and horror. The 11-year-old Prince Edward V, especially, shows this precocious awareness of his uncertain position. He even recognizes Richard as a possible threat.
Lines like, if I live until I be a man.
Heartbreaking, exactly. And that brief moment of perspicacity, his ability to see the danger, tragically seals their fate.
Because Richard needs his monstrous interior to stay hidden.
Precisely. Their survival, their very existence as legitimate heirs, is an intolerable threat. Their deaths, though offstage, are described by Tyrrell, the murderer, as the most arch deed of piteous massacre, highlighting their innocence, the act's depravity.
Destroying England's future, metaphorically.
Violating those temporal narratives of a future secured by the triumph of innocent youth. Killing hope itself.
Despite all this fear and dominance, there are voices of opposition, particularly among the women. Queen Margaret.
Ah, Margaret. Henry VI's widow. Technically banished, but she returns defiantly to unleash this torrent of devastating curses on Richard, and she warns the oblivious Yorkist nobles who mostly ignore her.
She has real agency, doesn't she? Even without formal power.
A gratifying amount of agency, yes. She acts almost as Richard's gravitational opposite, pulling events toward her desire for revenge, her curses. They're incredibly powerful in the play.
How so? What's opposite of cursing?
It's rooted in this grammatical culture where the very act of wishing, the way you phrased it, was believed to invoke divine intervention. It wasn't just angry shouting. It was almost like oratorical declamation, calling down judgment.
So her words have real weight.
In the play, they become Richard's doom. They play out with chilling accuracy, much like the prophecies in Macbeth. Her curses are like these potent, almost ritualistic prayers for retribution.
And the other women, Queen Elizabeth and Richard's mother.
Queen Elizabeth, Edward V, widow, and the Duchess of York, Richard's own mother. They are almost the only characters who consistently dare to speak truth to Richard's power, confronting him. We see their shared lamentations, their raw grief, especially after the princes and Anne die.
They represent the human cost.
They do. They even seek Margaret's guidance in cursing Richard, representing this collective voice of immense suffering, a desperate yearning for justice. Their shared pain is a powerful moral counterpoint to Richard's cold ambition. They're the moral compass.
But the most chilling voices are the ghosts, before Bosworth.
Absolutely the most psychologically impactful. That scene is a masterpiece of torment.
How does it work dramatically?
These ghosts, Prince Edward, Henry VI, Clarence, Hastings, Buckingham, they appear one by one, stripping away his confident facade, revealing the terror within. What's crucial is they are no longer deceived by the disparity between his external and internal monstrosity.
They see the real Richard, not the performance.
Exactly. They don't focus on his body, they focus entirely on his transgressions of the artificial monster, the horrific acts he chose to commit. Their parade of blame and guilt pushes Richard beyond monstrosity.
Like what?
Into pure, unadulterated self-loathing, forcing him to confront the full, horrifying weight of his deeds.
Which brings us neatly to the big themes. Let's start with ambition, that corrupting force.
It's a classic, vivid example of Lord Acton's axiom, isn't it? Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Richard seems the poster child for that.
His thirst for power places him in a labyrinth of betrayal, bloodshed, and manipulation. And interestingly, he seeks power not just for gratification or luxury, but almost as an end in itself. It's this relentless, vaulting ambition that completely consumes him.
And his corruption grows as his conscience shrinks.
Perfectly parallel, his descent into absolute corruption runs alongside his rejection of conscience. The more power he gains, the more he sheds any semblance of morality or empathy.
It's fascinating how he seems to lose control after getting the crown.
Yes, he begins to lose his self-command almost the moment he ascends the throne. The crown he craved becomes a burden. He gets increasingly paranoid, isolated, miserable. Trapped by the web he spun, the power becomes his prison.
Which leads to the nature of evil, not just born bad.
Exactly. Shakespeare explores Richard's artificial monstrosity, a villainy crafted through deliberate actions, internal choices. Now, during the Renaissance, monsters were not viewed as nightmarish figures so much as the disfigured agents of God carrying meaning.
So a deformity was seen as a sign.
Often, yes. A sign of divine displeasure, or a physical manifestation of an inner spiritual failing. So Richard's evil could be seen as having a providential dimension, like he's a tool for divine retribution.
But the play stresses his choices too, right? His free will.
Strongly emphasizes his agency. He doesn't just act out of fate, he chooses his path. He internalizes these criminal acts, becoming that artificial monster by choice, consciously transforming himself.
And his main tool for this is language, rhetoric, deception.
Absolutely central. His verbal inventiveness, his ability to twist words, manipulate language. It allows him to persuade and deceive with chilling precision.
The Anne scene being the prime example.
Prime example. He uses eloquence, false claims of love, perverse logic to win her over, despite her knowing he's a murderer. He literally turns black into white with words.
He makes his physical form not signify his inner evil to those he deceives.
Yes, he ignores his deformity to maintain a sameness that masks his villainous intentions. So people like Clarence trust his words, don't see the danger beneath the pleasant surface. Richard himself even compares himself to Judas.
Cried all hail when he meant all harm.
Exactly, illustrating his conscious, calculated use of dissembling. He knows full well the betrayal he intends.
The play also explores free will versus Divine retribution, fate.
A deep tension there, yes. A profound question for Shakespeare's audience. Richard's actions are undeniably driven by his own ferocious will, his ambition. But there's this persistent hint of a larger providential force at play.
Guiding events.
Guiding events towards a preordained conclusion, perhaps. This is where Queen Margaret's curses become so significant again. They're presented as potentially effectual.
Mean they actually work.
They're believed to have a real effect on events. This embodies that belief, influenced by growing Calvinism, that individual historical events are determined by God, who often punishes evil with apparent evil.
So Richard might be an instrument in a divine plan.
It's suggested. As if he's needed to purge England of its corruption, but will himself be punished in turn. The eventual triumph of Richmond, the end of Richard's tyranny. It can be seen as historical consequence, or for many back then, divine justice.
It fits that providential tragedy structure.
Exactly, where the arc of justice, though bloody, ultimately bends toward righteousness. Buckingham's final words capture this perfectly. Wrong hath but wrong, and blame the due of blame.
He recognizes the cosmic balance, almost.
He acknowledges his own role and the fitting nature of his demise, the universe balancing the scales.
And finally, the torment of conscience, which Richard seems to lack for most of the play.
His descent into absolute corruption runs parallel to his rejection of conscience. He seems to operate without one, yes, but that changes dramatically in the final act.
The ghosts again.
The ghost's visit forces him, truly for the first time, to confront his coward conscience, and his soliloquy afterwards is raw, agonizing self-revelation. The facade just crumbles.
Let's hear some of that again. It's so powerful.
He cries out, "What do I fear? Myself. There's none else by. Richard loves Richard. That is, I am I. Is there a murderer here? No. Yes, I am. Then fly. What, for myself? Great reason why, lest I revenge. What, myself upon myself? Alack, I love myself. Wherefore? For any good that I myself have done unto myself. Oh, no. Alas, I rather hate myself, for hateful deeds committed by myself. I am a villain."
Devastating. He finally sees himself as a villain, not just proclaiming it. He feels the agony internally.
It showcases the natural pangs of an affrighted conscience, haunting even the most ruthless. It aligns with thinkers like Adam Smith, conscience operating powerfully, causing agony of horror and remorse, driving the guilty to despair and distraction.
So Richard becomes proof you can't run from yourself.
A living testament to that idea.
Okay, Richard III is packed with memorable lines, iconic moments. Let's hit a few highlights. That opening line.
Now is the winter of our discontent. Instantly sets the tone. Richard's ambition, the deceptive piece, it suggests this sinister winter brewing beneath the surface, instantly recognizable.
And the cry from the battlefield.
A horse, my kingdom for a horse. Synonymous with ultimate desperation, right?
Familiar.
The king who sacrificed everything for the crown, now willing to give it all away just to escape, his world collapsing. A raw, primal scream.
And after wooing Anne, that chilling boast.
Was ever woman in this humor wooed? Was ever woman in this humor won? It highlights his manipulative skill, his cynical view of people, marveling at his own power to bend others to his will, his contempt for their vulnerability.
And that quote about wrens and eagles.
The world has grown so bad that wrens make prey where eagles dare not perch. Reflects the moral decay, the inverted order. The weak and vile, like Richard, are now preying where the rightful should rule. His jaded worldview, might makes right.
Beyond quotes those pivotal scenes, the wooing of Anne again?
Unparalleled audacity. Psychological warfare shows his extraordinary ability to make black seem white through sheer force of will and clever language.
Then the council scene. Hastings End.
Gripping. Richard's sudden, fake accusation, the swift, arbitrary order for execution, brutally showcases his tyranny, his disregard for due process. No trial, just the king's word, epitomizes his arbitrary justice.
And the princes, we don't see it, but Tyrrell's description.
Immense emotional weight. That image of ultimate innocence destroyed by tyranny, their tender embrace in death. It cements Richard's infamy as a child killer, anchors his evil in our hearts.
And finally, Richard's nightmare and awakening.
The culmination, profound psychological revelation. Conscience finally asserts itself. The facade crumbles. Leads to that chilling self-confession, admitting his own villainy, his self-hatred, the artificial monster consumed by its own creation.
Okay, let's tackle the big question. Myth versus reality. How historically accurate is Shakespeare's play?
It's a fascinating blend, isn't it? You absolutely have to remember the context. Shakespeare's writing under Queen Elizabeth I, a Tudor.
Whose dynasty overthrew Richard.
Exactly. So there's a vested interest in portraying the Plantagenet Richard III as an unmitigated villain. It legitimizes the Tudors. It's definitely theater, not history, as the saying goes. Shakespeare relied heavily on sources like Holinshed's Chronicles,
Which already had a Tudor slant.
which already carried significant Tudor biases, presenting a narrative favorable to the new rulers.
But it wasn't all made up. There are grains of truth.
There are. The 2012 skeleton discovery confirmed he did have scoliosis, that curved spine. Maybe not as severe as often portrayed on stage, but it was real. And historically, yes, he did summarily execute Hastings and the Rivers faction without formal trials.
And the princes.
Highly probable he had his nephews murdered. While we lack that smoking gun, that definitive proof, he benefited most from their disappearance. Many contemporaries suspected him immediately. His reign was known for arbitrary justice, sudden, brutal actions.
So while exaggerated, not entirely a hack job.
Exactly. His characterization isn't built on nothing. Richard was seen by many contemporaries as ruthless and ambitious.
But there are significant points where Shakespeare diverges dramatically from history.
Oh, absolutely. Historically, before his kingship, Richard was known to be loyal to his brother Edward IV. He was regarded as a highly effective military commander.
And he probably didn't personally murder Henry VI or Anne's husband.
Unlikely. The play suggests it for maximum villainy, Clarence's death, ordered by King Edward V himself for treason, not by Richard.
And Lady Anne?
Likely died of tuberculosis, a common disease then, not poison. And their marriage was long-standing, years long, possibly even happy, certainly not the swift, loveless manipulation the play shows us.
And the plan to marry his niece, Elizabeth.
Another dramatic embellishment. Historically, while rumors circulated for political reasons, he was also negotiating her marriage to a Portuguese prince. Again, Shakespeare enhances the drama, the villainy, for his narrative.
So moving beyond history, the play's resonance today, it feels timeless. What about the psychology of a dictator?
It's a chilling, captivating portrait, isn't it? How that initial ambition, once achieved, morphs into intense paranoia, extreme isolation. He eliminates rivals, then allies.
Until he's completely alone.
And the very act of achieving supreme power seems to poison him from within.
His internal suffering, the sleeplessness, the ghosts, the self-loathing, illustrates the self-destructive side of power.
Absolutely. Echoes that idea. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. He becomes a prisoner of his own mind, trapped by the deeds he committed to gain the crown.
Which leads to the broader warning about unchecked power.
In any era, Richard's arbitrary justice, summary executions, disregard for law is a timeless warning. It reflects the instability of Shakespeare's own England, too, with its volatile successions, religious shifts.
Underscoring the need for checks and balances.
Always. The play warns what happens when individuals operate without accountability, driven only by their own desires.
Power doesn't always corrupt, but it enables corruption.
It enables a ruler to act tyrannously if their temperament dictates it. Reveals the potential for destruction when there are no restraints on a ruthless nature, like Leontes in The Winter's Tale falling into jealous tyranny.
Okay, but despite all this monstrousness, Richard is still captivating. Why are we so fascinated by villains like him?
It's the allure of his wit, isn't it? His cunning, that disturbing self-awareness that pulls us in as co-conspirators at the start.
He's smart, darkly funny.
And he lets us in on the plan, almost inviting admiration for his devious artistry. Richard straddles the line between diabolical and tragically human. He's terrifying, yes, but his final moments of torment show a flicker of humanity. That complexity makes him endlessly compelling.
He reflects something we both fear and are curious about in human potential.
Exactly.
So bringing it all together for today, how do these themes apply to contemporary power dynamics? What are the takeaways?
Well, you can reflect on how themes of political ambition, manipulation through rhetoric spin, right? The abuse of power, the consequences of moral corruption, how they still resonate in leadership and society.
The specifics change, but the patterns remain.
Precisely. Shakespeare's England was vulnerable to powerful nobles. Modern societies face different vulnerabilities, maybe through propaganda, information control, erosion of democratic norms. The play encourages us to stay vigilant, to question.
To recognize how ambition can curdle into tyranny, even subtly.
Even in our own time, yes.
So, wrapping up this deep dive into Richard III, it's just abundantly clear, isn't it? Shakespeare gives us this unparalleled analysis of ambition, deception, the corrosive effects of unchecked power.
He vividly illustrates the immense cost of moral corruption and the eventual, often brutal triumph of justice, or perhaps just historical consequence.
Richard's journey is terrifying. From that cunning, self-aware manipulator,
who delights in his own villainy, yes.
to a tormented soul, utterly consumed and destroyed by his own deeds.
It's a masterful exploration. how that relentless pursuit of the crown leads not just to external chaos, but profound internal destruction, self-loathing.
So here's a final thought for you to mull over. In a world endlessly fascinated by the rise and fall of powerful figures, and where the allure of control can be so intoxicating, what might Richard III teach us about the subtle, insidious ways that power, once attained, begins to destroy the very person who wields it from the inside out?
That's definitely something to think about, how power itself can become the ultimate poison.